It's Attribution Nation time, where we look at attribution from multiple angles in a unique mini-series format. You're in the trenches with me for the next 5 episodes, talking to attribution practitioners. Let's go. All right. Well, we have had some fantastic conversations with folks that are in the trenches, people that are working in marketing attribution all day, every day. And I've learned quite a bit from these conversations. And so, Andrea, let's talk a little bit about what we've learned, because you sit in on all of these, you hear everything as our esteemed producer, and so you get to learn things as much as I do. So let's talk a little bit about what we learned.
Let's do it. So my first takeaway from this is I'm pretty sure that like most of the job of marketing operations is like convincing someone that you're right about something. That's like my first takeaway. Because like even Chris Walker, who, if you don't know who Chris Walker is, so he's made a big name for himself on LinkedIn. I feel like you must not be in marketing or operations and on LinkedIn at the same time if you don't know who Chris is. And I feel like everything you see on LinkedIn, when he talks about something, people are like, oh yeah, totally. And like, you're talking like thousands of reactions, thousands of comments. I don't even know how many millions and millions of views his videos get. And yet in his interview, he's like, yeah, like I'm trying to convince people who pay me, right? And like you and I are both consultants a long time, so we know this too. You pay a substantial amount for our brains to have an idea and tell you what to do, and then you still push back on it. Like he was like, I'm trying to get people to think about this differently, and I fail all the time. Like people just still go back to doing what they were before. And so I feel like there are a ton of tips from like Kimberly in her episode about how to convince executives, especially when there's turnover, how to invest in the right technologies and all of that stuff. Like I was just struck by how much of everyone's job in the trenches seems to be convincing somebody who holds the purse strings that you know what the fuck you're doing and just please give me the money to do what I know I need to do.
Yeah, I mean, so much of, think about for a second, we're talking about marketing attribution, which is using numbers and data to understand what is working and what is not working in marketing. That in and of itself means that you have to convince somebody that 1, the data is right, 2, the mathematical models that you're using are appropriate, and 3, that sometimes you have to tell somebody that their baby's ugly. And to do that takes a lot of convincing. And so much of what we do is just this game of getting people to believe things that we know because we've been in the weeds, in the trenches, working in the tools and the platforms, living in the data all day, every day. We know these things to be true. We have to go convince people, hey, you have to see it the same way I'm seeing it because this is how it's supposed to be seen. And that's just tough. It's tough to do.
Yeah. And I loved Sai's advice here. So she talked a lot about empathy as a way to, 1, learn technology, which I was like, how interesting. But 2, to do all of this influencing of people up, down, and across the organization. I thought, and by the way, like I would follow Sai into a burning building. I thought she was so great. Just in general, she was really inspiring. And I just love how calm her energy is and just what I just loved her energy in general. Yeah, so I think that that's a key, right? Like being able to empathize with what those people are thinking and then tell them a story that they resonate with. That was super inspiring to me because I think that that's the key, right? Like so many people in operations obviously end up talking about the technology and the data and all of the stuff, but really to get things done, you have to have that softer side of management, change management, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's emotional intelligence. It's understanding how to get through to people when they may be, in some cases, predisposed to not wanting to hear your message. So, we used to deal with this all the time. When you and I worked together way back when, as consultants, we used to deal with this all the time because we would have, we'd be consulting on marketing operations work in Marketo and Salesforce and all these other platforms and tools and all these processes. And we constantly had people that viewed us as a threat to their job. And the only way that we could say, look, I'm not a threat here. I'm actually going to help you get promoted if you just listen to me, is that we had to have that emotional intelligence, that empathy to understand that they're not pushing back because they're trying to be jerks. They're pushing back because they're feeling threatened by the fact that we may take their job, or we may result in them not getting the promotion they want because we're the ones that look like the superheroes. And so we had to always, when we encountered those folks, we had to take a step back and understand, like, how can I get this person on my team instead of thinking we're an adversary? And I think that's what Sai was getting into a lot, is understanding that we're all on the same team here. We all want what's best for Cisco, Meraki, all the different orgs she's worked with. We're all on the same team. We want what's best for the business and for the marketing department. So we have to work together on this. And I'm not your enemy. Even though I might tell you that your campaign sucked, I'm not your enemy. I'm doing this to help you.
Yeah. And Kimberly had a great tip on that campaign, your baby is ugly situation too, which was just, you want more budget next quarter, next half, next year. This is how you get more budget, by admitting what sucked and what you're going to do differently to make it better. And then, of course, when things crush, do more of that, right? So a lot of practical tips for how to navigate a lot of those situations in a lot of the episodes, which is cool.
Well, and you have to be honest with yourself when you're doing reporting. You have to be honest with yourself and honest with others. I mean, you've been in leadership roles. If somebody comes to you and says, everything I've done is fantastic, it's the best thing that's ever existed, I've never done a single thing that wasn't perfect, you immediately know that somebody's blowing smoke up your ass. Like, you know that things are being spun and that you're being lied to, basically. So if you can't be honest and and be critical of yourself, then you're going to lose credibility in the organization if you can't even critique yourself. So I think it's just so important to have that emotional intelligence, but also that just honesty about, look, not everything is perfect. Not everything's great. Sometimes we do bad campaigns. Let's learn from it and then move on.
Good people can do bad campaigns.
Absolutely.
A bad campaign doesn't make you a bad person or a bad marketer. All right. So that is a good segue to takeaway 2, which is ABE, which account-based everything stole, but it should mean always be evolving. So there are 2 people on the cast, Kimberly and Sai, who were in B2C for many years and then transitioned to B2B, business to business. And that is a huge transition. The buying cycle is totally different. The way buyers operate, the journey is totally different. The data is totally different. The organization structure, totally different. So that's a huge component. Obviously, Chris Walker, has talked a lot for many years about attribution, and his opinion on it has been constantly evolving. And then Bailey is the youngest person you've ever had on the show. And so, of course, she's constantly learning. But I think even the wisdom that she shared, that everything is always a work in progress, right? She talked a lot about how she got to work really closely with her CMO on dashboards and reporting. And you asked her the question, did you nail it? Like, what were you in a great cadence at the end? And she was sort of like, listen, everything's always a work in progress, right? So even when you have done really good work and you're really proud of yourself, you still should constantly be in this area of evolving. And I think, every time, what's his name? Scott Bricker releases his all of the marketing technology stack infographic, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And so my question to you, obviously evolution in technology forward role like operations is just table stakes, but how do you keep track of it all? What do you and your clients do to keep up with this? Because I have not really been in operations now for a few years, and I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. How do you keep track?
Yeah, so Scott Brinker. There's an N in there. You said Bricker. You're thinking JT Bricker, but yeah. So I think, so one of the things I liked about Bailey when we had our conversation with Bailey is, she made it clear that she was able to take the feedback from her CMO as, I'm giving you this feedback to improve. It's not personal. I'm not trying to talk down about your work product. It's about improving and getting to where we need to be. And the thing I loved about that conversation with her is that it seemed like she was just so open to that feedback and so accepting of the feedback, which is super important when you are particularly at that stage in your career. You have got to be open to feedback. You have to be, because if you aren't, you're never going to learn from the people that are at where you want to be in your career. So you've got people that are at where you want to be. They're telling you how to get there. You have to accept that. And personally, that was a huge unlock for me in my career. I always had a challenge accepting feedback. I always took feedback personally. And then it finally hit me that you got to stop doing that. And once I stopped taking feedback personally and realized it was coaching. It was just like sports coaching. Like, hey, your baseball swing sucks. Here's how to make it better. Cool. Like I like that, but I wasn't approaching feedback in the workplace the same way. So when I changed my mindset there, that really helped unlock my career. And I think that was something that Bailey just seemed to be always open to, at least from our conversation. To answer your other question that you asked about, how do you stay on top of everything? Yeah, Scott's latest graphic is like 14,000 different MarTech platforms. You can't stay on top of 14,000 MarTech platforms. You just can't. So for me, the way that I've always approached it is I approach it from the standpoint of what are the needs? What are the platforms that I need for my business to be successful? And then what are the types of technology and platforms that my clients need to be successful? And if something's coming up with my clients over and over again, then I'm going to go pay attention to that. But if my clients aren't asking questions about the latest whatever tool, then to me, it's not on their radar. So it's probably not going to be on my radar. Now, I try to stay up to speed on things because obviously, we should be making recommendations that our clients aren't even aware of, right? So I try to stay up on things, but I try to focus it on what I think is going to be important to either my business or my client's business. And then obviously, if they're bringing stuff up and asking questions about certain technology, then that's like a big, hey, go look. Like you have to go learn this. So that's kind of how I've always approached it. So I think one other thing that I think is important to take away from Sai and Kimberly's journey, and we talked about this at the end of Sai's episode as one of the takeaways, is to be fearless. Don't be afraid to stretch yourself, and don't be afraid to jump into murky waters that you may not be sure what to expect when you jump in. Because if you jump in knowing, hey, I know how to swim, I'm going to be okay, you're going to have a better outcome. Your outcome is going to be fine. Both Kimberly and Sai were both fearless in the way that they approached their transition from B2C into B2B, which is a huge transition. I don't think, particularly from a reporting and analytics standpoint, I don't think a lot of people quite understand how drastic that change is. But it's a huge change, and they approached it without fear. And I think that that's an important thing to take away from both of their stories.
Yeah, I like that.
So one other thing that I think is for me becoming very clear as it relates to, again, going back to Scott Brinker's 14,000 MarTech platforms, I think that, 7 years ago when you and I were working closely together as consultants, I think that was closer to like 5,000. And it was a lot easier to be an expert or at least maybe not an expert, but know enough to be dangerous in most of the categories in Scott's landscape. Now there's so many categories and there's so many different things that it's impossible for any one person to even know enough to be dangerous across all the categories. So I think that what people need to understand is you shouldn't try to be an expert in all of these things. You shouldn't try to be dangerous in all of these things. Pick the things that are most important to you, pick the things that are most interesting to you, and get really specialized in those. I think we're going to be entering an era of specialization due to the breadth of the different MarTech platforms that are out there that makes it impossible for people to be, to know everything. I think we're going to be entering an era of specialization. And so I think it's important for folks to find the things that they're interested in and the things that they're good at and the things that are relevant, and focus on those.
I also think there's a fundamental component that people have to understand. So even when you listen to Sai, so they use Salesforce and Marketo, which like two classic technologies. And the way that I talk about Salesforce, because I have been using it for, oh God, I don't know, Drew, 13 years? Fuck me. And like the way that I talk about it, right, is like, okay, the campaign object and campaign members and blah, blah, blah. And like the way that, and you can tell that she is newer to the technology because she doesn't use all of the words, but she nails the concepts. She understands what a campaign does, how it operates, and she has learned enough about it through her approach of empathizing with the sellers to understand what they need, and her marketers to understand what kind of reporting they need, and executives to understand what kind of reporting they're looking at. She has empathized and listened to all of these people give her inputs so that she can say, okay, how does this technology help me achieve that? I actually think it's kind of a back to basics in ops where you need to understand how relational databases work, right? So like if you want to study something or improve on something, I agree with you that doing it in a technology, if it's big enough, like a Salesforce or a Marketo, is still viable, but you also need to understand basics and remember to go back to the ideas of just what's the word for that? Like requirement gathering basics, right? Like what do you need to understand and do? And I actually think it would help a lot of operations people. I've worked with people in the past who immediately jumped to, this is how you solve for that. And it's like, no, but you didn't listen to what my requirements really are. I might have a different idea than the last time that you solved for this. So I actually think that as technology continues to evolve and continuing to kind of like solve for the same problem, potentially in a new way, or be really open-minded is actually part of what the future looks like too.
Oh, I would agree wholeheartedly. Yeah. I mean, I think you've got those foundational principles that if you don't have that solid foundation, it doesn't matter if there's 14,000 or 2,000 MarTech platforms out there. Without a solid foundation, you're going to be lost no matter what. So you have to start with that solid foundation. And then from there, you can figure out, where do I want to branch out?
Yeah. All right, let's move on to takeaway 3, which is an attribution takeaway, because this is Attribution Nation. And so like, what do these in the trenches people think of attribution? So I just wrote down a few. Kimberly said, it's a lens. Chris said, it's a piece of the puzzle. Sai said, it's fodder for storytelling. She didn't say that technically, but I'm translating it. Bailey said, it opens up so many process conversations. So this is it, right? Like attribution is not a credit game like it so often gets boiled down to. It is not just even how you justify your budget. Like these people who use the attribution technology and the concept of attribution or just like reporting on ROI, they're saying these technologies are a lens. It's a way to tell better stories. It's a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole thing. It's a way to open up, hey, this process isn't working when we're getting leads in. They don't have the right data. We're not giving them to the right teams. This isn't working. We're not doing what we need to as a business, as the human beings behind it. And I just thought that was so telling that, I mean, literally none of them are just like, it's how I get more budget every month. You know what I mean? Like it's really not, it doesn't boil down to that for pretty much anybody in the actual trenches.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the credit game is part of what's gotten marketing attribution such a bad rap over the years, is people using it for the wrong purpose, right? Like, if I try to use a hammer to, screw a bolt into something, like obviously it's not going to work and I'm going to go blame the hammer. Well, that's not what a hammer's for. You're using the wrong tool for something, or you're using the tool in the wrong way. And I think that credit game is absolutely a case of using the attribution tool for the wrong damn thing. So the other thing too is I love Kimberly's piece that it's a lens, because when we think about attribution and reporting and data, not only one of the biggest things that I talk to clients about all the time is perspective, and lenses change perspective, right? So perspective is also how I talk about how to structure reports, right? Like You take the same data set and you change your perspective to view opportunities created during a certain time frame. And then you look at the same data set from a different perspective and you're looking at opportunities closed won during a certain time frame. Same data, same opportunities, we're just changing the perspective. So the lens and perspective is so important when it comes to attribution. Also, when you look at attribution models are just a different way of applying a different perspective, a different lens to the same data set. They're used as tools. I was literally just on a call with a customer right before we started recording this. We were talking about like the criticism of, well, the model's wrong. No, the model's not wrong. The model is just a mathematical way of assigning value to a touch point. The model's not wrong. If attribution's not working, 99.9% of the time, it's not the lens. It's the data set that you're applying the lens to that has the problem. So I think that's so important to keep that in mind. Is you've got to use the tool the way that the tool is intended to be used. And attribution is not intended to be used for credit. It's not intended for marketing to come back and compete with sales. Oh, well, we get credit for 45% of all the revenue. No, you don't. That's not what this is about.
Yeah. It's like, think of yourself as like an optometrist. 1 or 2. Do you want a multi-touch attribution W model, or would you like a U-shaped attribution model? And I think that your point, and well, actually, I don't think you made this point on this particular episode, but you've made it before, which is that when people, and actually I think Bailey talked about this in her episode when you talked about reporting and how to get people the reporting that they need, because she's worked at a bunch of startups where people go from, I don't know what is working because I have no data and I can't see anything, to, okay, now I have all this data, but I still don't really know what's working because I don't know what's good and what's not. So I think that a lot of times the hole that people fall into is that they'll use attribution platforms, especially, to collect all of this data and then go, oh, well, what do I do now? Right. So like one of the things that I know you love doing, and I'd love you to talk about it a little bit more, is when you're building reporting, making sure that that report answers a question about what you plan to do differently and the decision that you actually want to make. Because I think a lot of people just set stuff up and they're like, here's what the W model says. And it's like, okay, but
so what?
Is it bad? Yes. So what?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that so this is a framework that I kind of created back in the Lead MD days. And I don't know that I necessarily created this. I don't think this is like a Drew special. I think it's just something that I just like noticed, and probably a million other people noticed it before me, is that reports work best when they're designed to answer a very specific and narrow question. And narrow is very important here because a lot of people try to create like one report to tell me everything in the world about how marketing's performing. And it's like, no, you can't do that. That doesn't exist. So the more narrow the report is, number one, the easier it is to create, which is fine. But more than anything else, it's easier to read and understand and take away insights. Because if you have one report that's massive, that's telling you all the stuff about web and trade shows and everything all in one report, it's so difficult to figure out what am I supposed to take away from this report? But when you make it a very narrow question, the takeaway is super easy because you're just answering a question. Now, the next step always becomes, you have reports, and I use this, I kind of talk about this a lot of times in the sense of like a pyramid. I call it the reporting pyramid. And the foundational layer is the what's happening in the organization. It's the very broad reports. It's the high level reports that are telling us that, hey, trade shows influenced $2 million in pipeline last quarter. Cool. That's something that's interesting, but we don't know if it's good. We don't know if it's bad. It's without context, but that's just a foundational report. We can't actually get to insights without that foundation. So the next thing is you layer on top of that the context. Is this good or bad? Where you compare it to previous quarters and you compare it to the same quarter year over year. Now you're starting to develop is this good? Is it bad? Are we going up? Are we going down? Are we flat? Like that's that next layer. Then you start asking the questions of how and why. Well, trade shows influenced $2 million in pipeline last quarter. Well, the previous quarter, it was $4 million in pipeline. Ooh, that's bad. We don't like that. Why did that go down? Now, as you start asking why questions and how questions, that's when you go up the pyramid and to the very top, which is where you get to your insights. Oh, we were down from 4 million to 2 million because last quarter we only did 3 trade shows and the previous quarter we did 12. Oh, that makes sense. That's not a problem. That's just the general, seasonality of trade shows. That makes sense. Now, when we compare it to year over year, we did the exact same trade shows last year and they generated $3 million in pipeline. Ooh, now that's bad because it's the same trade shows and pipeline went down by $1 million. Why is that? Did we change our approach at the trade shows? Did we change our investment level at the trade show? What did we change about the trade shows that made us go down? Let's figure that out and then let's reverse that. Now, by the way, if you notice at the very top of the pyramid there where we get to the insight of why did we go from 3 million to 2 million year over year, that's not a question you can answer with data. You're not going to be able to run a report that tells us that we changed our entire approach at the trade show. We, instead of having a 20 by 20 booth, we went with a 10 by 10 booth and a speaking engagement. That's totally, you can't run a report to get to that insight, but you have to have the reports that allow you to understand where to look and what questions to ask elsewhere in the organization to get to that insight.
Brilliant. Love it. Speaking of insights, that's where you used to work. Just kidding.
It is, yes.
It is, but that's not where I was going with it. The takeaway number 4 is where I was going with it, which is that reporting, what we just talked about, is so much more than numbers. It is storytelling. And the other word that was used constantly by especially Sai, but other people too, is education. Mm-hmm. Talk to me, Drew. What was your main takeaway around the importance of storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sai said the word storytelling or story about 15,000 times in her episode, which probably, was not even enough because that is really what it is. It's telling a story about what's going on in the organization and how we should take that information and use it to do better work. So again, I'll go back to that example that I was just talking about with trade shows, which is funny because that's what I did when I worked at Insight, is I managed over 100 trade shows a year.
It's all coming together. It's all coming together, people. Listen, we're professionals, okay? We tie things in a nice, pretty little bow here at the end of the episode, at the end of this mini series, in our recap episode.
Exactly. And the funny thing is because I'm old, we didn't have any of this technology when I was doing 100 trade shows a year at Insight. So we had no visibility into this, which is why the first time I saw Bizzle, I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. This would have solved that problem back at Insight all those years ago. But anyways, so if I come to you and I tell you, Andrea, trade shows last year, you're the CMO, I'm your analyst. I say, Andrea, trade shows influenced $2 million in pipeline last quarter. Cool. So what? Well, that's not a full story. I'm not telling you a full story. What I'm telling you is like a portion of that. Now, if I come and tell you, hey, trade shows influenced $2 million in pipeline last quarter, which is actually down. We did the exact same trade shows last year, and they influenced $3 million in pipeline. Now, what I found out that's because we changed our approach to these 3 trade shows. We went away from booths and went to speaking slots instead. We didn't change our investment too much. The investment stayed pretty much flat, but it was really kind of the strategy for each of the trade shows. That's a complete story. And you now, as the CMO, know what action to take. The change that we made to our approach at the trade shows did not have the desired impact. We need to go back to the drawing board and either go back to the way they used to be or come up with a whole new strategy for how we're going to implement these trade shows. That is a complete story. The other thing that I always talk about particularly with multi-touch is simply telling the story about how an opportunity or a deal came to be. It's telling the story about the characters in the story, the characters being all the different members of the buying committee. You have chapters in the story, which is the different ways that they engaged with marketing and sales. And you have plot devices that move things more quickly than others, or that have a bigger impact than others. And that's the way that the model works with like different positions and stuff like that. That's all multi-touch attribution is doing, is it's creating a story for an opportunity or a deal and tell you all the chapters and all the characters along that journey. And then it allows you to aggregate that up so that you can understand which chapters and which characters tend to have the biggest impact on the different opportunities and deals. But that's really all it is it's telling a story. And then you get to determine how you want to use the different data points that are in that story. And I think that's what reporting is. And there's a whole education process through there. But like to Chris's point, he mentioned that you have to align the organization around that measurement. And that's where you have to tell the story, again, telling a story about how and why are we measuring in this way? Because, well, we're measuring this way because it's better than just looking at first touch. We're measuring multi-touch because it's better than just measuring last touch. And you have to educate and educate people to understand why it's better. And then that requires you like helping people understand by telling that story.
Yeah. I love too that Sai talked about, there are people who'd worked, I don't remember if it was at Cisco or the company before that, but there are people who had worked there for years and never truly understood how buyers buy. And she just went and created a deck, nothing super sexy, but ultimately just went with the education of here's what we're seeing. Here's what kinds of content people, consume first. And then what they do after that. And then how they bring in this stakeholder and how they bring in this stakeholder and when they talk to a sales rep. And just even breaking down what their customer journey looks like. She said people were like, oh my God, I didn't understand this, right? And when you think about the impact of that, right? If you have marketers who have never even seen the customer journey for the product that they're selling and the buyers that they have, how can they even be effective, right? So I think there's a lot of, I don't know, people are always looking for like meaning in the work that they do, right? And like, I think that it was interesting to me to listen to Sai. And again, I was like a fangirl of this woman, but I think it was interesting for me to see how clearly the work that she does makes everyone around her better. And I think that for an operations person, which might seem like, oh, you're like in data and you're doing all this stuff. Like, I thought that for me, she was one of the most inspiring people I've heard because I could just tell that she really took that human first approach. And again, that everyone who gets to work with her loves it because she makes them better, yes, through the data, but also through her empathy and her storytelling. It was dope.
Yeah, I loved that she positioned herself as the voice of the customer. Like that was, to me, that was really eye-opening about the way that she approaches her role, because that is really what she is. She's the voice of the customer that says, when you market to me like this, I buy. When you market to me like this, I don't buy. Like and it's really that simple. And I just love that how she just framed it in that like short little concise thing just made me understand it immediately. Like, yeah, that makes so much sense. The other thing that I wanted to say in response to what you were talking about is, I think about customer journey. The important takeaway from that is, I think that there's so many people in marketing that they don't look at the bigger picture of the entire buyer journey and what their role is in facilitating that. They look at, I'm an ads person. I make ads, I get leads. That's all I do. But they've disconnected themselves from the customer journey. They've disconnected themselves from the buying process. And they're so focused on this little fief of land that they own that they completely lose sight of the bigger picture. And I think that that's where a lot of the conversations around doing better marketing comes from seeing the bigger picture and understanding what your role is in the buyer journey and optimizing for that versus just claiming ownership of this little fief of land. Same thing for like field events and event marketers. Like, again, they get so focused on, we do events. Cool. What does that mean in the grand scheme of things? Like in the bigger picture? Like, what is your role in relation to the buyer journey and the customer journey? And I think that the more that marketers try to understand what they do through the lens, tying it back to lenses, through the lens of the big buyer journey, the better people will get at marketing, because you're doing something that is designed to have a larger impact than just what type of food are we serving at this event.
The last thing I would add to that point is that it is also career insurance, right? What we learned during COVID is that if you only did events and that was your only skill set, and you did not ask that question, how can I be valuable to the customer in their journey of purchasing from my organization, you got fired, right? And I think that is the same with anything, right? As AI changes the way that people search, as an example, if you are just an SEO expert and that is your only skill set in marketing, like, I don't think that's very safe in the long term, right? So I think even just that backing up and really understanding how can you as a marketer impact a customer getting the education that they need and eventually buying the product, the better off you are to have a longer term sustainable career without these sort of bumps when things change. And marketing is just one of those disciplines. It ain't accounting. It's just changing constantly. So that's the always be evolving point number 2, back to it again.
Well, and this is something that I know that you and I have talked about a lot throughout our work together, is how do you achieve your personal career goals, right? Like, you and I have talked a ton about career goals, and we have folks out there that are ads people and they want to become CMOs. Well, you can't become a CMO if you're just an ads person. You have to understand the entire buyer journey if you are going to become a CMO from an ads person. That is reality. You will never, ever become a CMO if you don't understand the larger picture outside of ads. And I'm not picking on ads people. That goes for anybody that has a very small niche in the marketing world. You cannot achieve career goals by staying only focused on that little niche. It won't happen. And that goes to the same thing for CMOs. We've had this conversation about CMOs for a long time too, because CMOs always want a seat at the table with the CEO and the CFO and the CRO and all the other people. But there's that negative impression of marketers, as this goes back to what Justin always used to say, they're the arts and crafts department. And if marketing wants to change their perception as being the arts and crafts department, they have to see the bigger picture as well. You can't focus as a marketer on leads and impressions and click-throughs and want to be taken seriously by CEOs and CFOs. It's never going to happen. You have to see the bigger picture. So that ability to up-level your own viewpoint to seeing the bigger picture and seeing the larger role that you're playing in the organization and in the buying journey is not just career insurance, but also helps you achieve your career goals.
Yeah, love. All right. Well, good recap. Anything that you feel compelled to add to the ass end of this episode, Drew?
No, I think those were the big takeaways that I had and the things that I really wanted to talk about. So as always, thank you, Andrea, for all of your help with all of this. Really appreciate it. And just, love getting to continue working with you.
Yeah, same. This is like the dream. Just keep working with all the people that you already know and love to work with. That's what we're doing. So
exactly.
Great season 2, mini-series 2, all about In the Trenches. Any teasers on what mini-series 3 might have in store for us, Drusif?
Well, I know that we're going to have a mini-series coming up about marketing mix modeling or media mix modeling. It may or may not be, mini-series number 3, but it most likely will. So we'll be talking a lot about marketing mix modeling, how that compares to marketing attribution. Are they mortal enemies, or are they able to coexist and actually maybe even work good together? So that's it's a little something that is going to be coming up most likely as part of miniseries number 3.
Awesome. Well, I'll be there, badgering guests into showing up on time. So, and writing questions. So wrap it up, Drew. You know how to do it. You know what to say. You're the guy.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you everybody for listening. If you do like the show, please subscribe. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you do have any questions, or you would like more information, or you think that there's a topic that should be part of an upcoming mini-series, or you think that there's a person that we should be interviewing, please reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, really easy to find. Even though my last name is Smith, which makes me difficult to find, I'm easy to find because it's Andrew and then Drew in parentheses, because that's what I go by, Smith. So find me there, and you can connect with me and send me all your feedback. Even if you hate every episode you've ever listened to, send me the feedback, because, maybe my baby's ugly.
As we discussed, you're into feedback. It's how you grew in your career. So
yeah,
what's up? All right, cool. See you next time, Drew.
See ya.